A brand new DLC for Remnant 2 just dropped called The Awakened King. Is this worth your money? Is there plenty of content? And is it fun? Well, I'm going to go over my personal experience as I've already beaten the entire DLC twice on Apocalypse mode and once on Veteran. I had a blast through the experience and the new build possibilities are astounding.
My liege demands pain and punishment, and I deliver.
Remnant 2 has always suffered from performance issues, and this DLC is no different. I've only had minor issues, but I have a higher end PC. A buddy of mine had multiple crashes, and apparently there have been many issues on console. The devs usually do a good job of getting fixes out for that stuff as fast as possible, so if you run into those issues, maybe pick it back up in a couple of days or next week, and you should have a smoother experience. I played in co-op, and there were definitely some shenanigans with deaths not working properly or Challenger's revive perk not even activating at all. But it didn't really impact our experience, and we just kind of laughed every once in a while when things got a little goofed. There was a major issue with the first dungeon in this DLC, and a little bit more, as the new frog creatures would instantly kill you even on veteran mode in full defensive gear, which made Apocalypse against these cretins an absolute nightmare. It has since been fixed, and while they are still the new most annoying enemy in the game, they're much more fair to fight. Well, what actually is the new DLC? The addition itself was a new add-on to Lossum, the dark and desolate world that had burning buildings and a more Bloodborne type feel to it. Your first time through, you're able to roll a full brand new adventure mode that's just the new stuff. After your first run through, then you have all the DLC stuff generated randomly among the Lossum adventure, letting you get a first experience with most of the new items and then spice up the adventure/campaign mode with more variety. And the world is now more of a fisherman village right on the coast. You have ships in the harbor and a couple smaller sea monsters the inhabitants have caught. There are actually witches here and there, as well as one you meet early on who was kicked out of the royal palace and is somewhat in hiding. And the whole thing has a very dark magic feel to it, even with you being able to see a witch's outfit as soon as you reach the first area. There are several new guns, mutators, mods, and trinkets that add a lot to the gameplay. A large focus went to status damage and status duration, as that's what the new class is focused around. All kinds of rings and amulets modify status duration, which is welcome as there are many different ways to apply statuses that only add to the build variations you can do. Trait points were up to 85, so you can get a lot more out of your passives. Honestly, this change is pretty amazing, as before it was tough to fit in all the stuff you needed for each build, and now I actually feel like I have plenty most of the time. The area itself is not all that different from the main game. You're going to explore an open area with several side dungeons and basically 3 main ones. There are hidden secrets and puzzles in them, all like jars you need to shoot or doors you need to unlock. The main difference now being this DLC area is more sporadic. It won't necessarily be hard to find the correct path, but the map looks more bizarre at times with so many paths stacking on top of each other, which also means you have a lot of ladders to climb this time around, and it's kind of the only minor bad thing, as ladders suck to climb in this game without a specific trait, but that trait is completely useless 90% of the game. That trait lets you move faster when climbing and vaulting, which should just be a free passive for the character, because in actual combat, having it only nerfs your abilities. But in the general gameplay, this isn't going to harm anything, and it's actually nice to explore vertically, with the world feeling a lot less like a flat map. Ultimately, the area is much more unique than any other, and it made running around in it the first few times quite exciting. There were new bosses added in, of course, and I'm happy to say that these are some of the best bosses in the entire game. There are 3 as far as I'm aware of, and several different aberrations you're going to go up against. The aberrations are tough as nails, let me tell you, but luckily most are near world stones or your checkpoints. The first boss is a witch that slams you around with a massive anchor. She's very aggressive and traps you in this small enclosed maze. Running around the maze lets you easily avoid her, or you can dodge the attacks. She summons a pack of pigs to fight you, which is quite hilarious, and then runs around above you to slam down when you don't expect it. Overall, a very creative fight that uses the environment to its advantage. Then we have the Melee Monster. This dual-wielding spear boss is the new best boss in the entire game. He is absolutely amazing from his cutscene down to his mechanics. First of all, the new bosses are all very easy to dodge. You can actually dodge early most often and they go right past you. The difficulty comes from you running out of stamina, as they're relentless and very aggressive. This guy here will attack you repeatedly, and then after a bit, sit down and take a rest. If you play this right, this gives you a huge damage phase to dump your bullets or start hitting him. Then he runs away and summons loads of minions. This can be tricky as you need to avoid spears being thrown at you and fight off the flying angels. Song of Afir is king as always, and you can split your attention if you're in co-op. This fight overall just felt really good to me, and it's extremely fun for melee builds, which is always nice to see. Then lastly, you have the big kahuna, the king. He's a massive spectacle fight with his hammer that he chained his own guards to. Slams you around with the hammer, stomps the ground with waves of AoE, and blasts you with lasers from the ground. This is yet another more lenient fight in terms of your dodges, but man is he a blast to take on. Although it is kind of weird he only gets one buff or a fix when you beat him in Apocalypse mode. All bosses get two except for him, which I will say seems kind of odd. Overall, all three boss fights felt unique, fun, and well worth coming back to the game for some new challenges. Compared to some of the endgame bosses, these guys are not all that difficult. Yeah, they might beat you up a bit, but you'll get it without too much pain. And that's perfectly fine. I'm of the opinion that games don't need to break you to be a good challenge, and of course, if you have a solid setup of builds, bosses should be relatively easy to take on. Remnant 2 draws the line very well when it comes to being overpowered versus just straight up broken, and these bosses felt very much perfect as far as I was concerned. Of course, the new class introduced in this DLC is what everyone is excited to jump back in for. The Ritualist can be found by finding a dead sea serpent in the main open region. Behind it, you can jump down onto some boats and clamber along into the back of a cave. Defeat the witch enchanting a pig here, and you can grab the class item right behind them. A nice easy one to find that is still often missed until you learn about it. The Ritualist is essentially a witch. You use dark magic sigils as your skills and inflict statuses on you and your enemies. The class greatly boosts status damage, status application to groups, and the duration statuses stay active, allowing you to always have fire, acid, bleed, and shock on groups or bosses. The first skill, Eruption, deals massive damage to enemies depending on how many statuses they have on them. You punch a small sigil in the air and boom, everyone around you explodes. The Miasma skill creates an incredibly large dark sigil that causes all enemies near you to gain every status effect, at least those 4 that count as the main statuses. If enemies are near each other, they instantly die as the shock chains them all up in a big electric blast. This is the coolest skill in the game, as with high amounts of cooldown, you can use it every few seconds for a lot of fun and basically free ad clear. Then you have Death Wish, which negates all healing and drains your health rapidly. But for the next 20 seconds, you also gain a whopping 35% damage boost and 10% base damage dealt as lifesteal, forcing you to be very aggressive for higher damage. Except if you throw on the trait you get from the Handler class, this almost completely negates the damage you gain altogether. It's incredibly easy to get around that negative there with just a single trait, and thus allows you to have a 35% damage boost with no negative. You're also going to cast a dark red sigil around you, which is very fitting. This class can be used with all the other classes. It is highly versatile, really good for damage and crit, and has some of the coolest effects in the game. It is worth getting this DLC just to grab this class for sure, and you really can't have more fun with it. An excellent new class that adds a lot to the gameplay and simply makes Remnant 2 more of an amazing adventure. If you enjoyed the wide variety of puzzles Remnant 2 offered before, then you will like this DLC. There are platforms you need to jump around, wells you need to explore, bells to shoot, and lighthouses to unlock. There are actually a lot of new items that you can collect, and so far most of the ones I've found are really darn useful. The new shotgun in the game automatically deals fire damage and is a really solid shotgun. Extremely fun to use and obviously powerful, as you can apply 3 different statuses with one gun now. There's my personal favorite, a giant hook that you can beat down enemies with. I hit over 12k damage in a single hit with this, and it is the best melee option for stupid high damage. Also having some incredible stagger in just bullying elites even on Apocalypse. You have the new witch-based armor set that is quite fashionable, and it's hanging strung up on a body, which, hey, not the best way to get new clothes, but it looks pretty cool. There are many new mutators and modifiers that go in your guns. You can buy several from Dwell, and many you get from the different aberrations. There are some really good ones now that greatly benefit statuses or allow you to crit and apply acid. Also, there's apparently a new gun, which requires a very specific world role to get, which a few people have now, but there is a somewhat in-depth quest to go on if you're up for it. Or you could go get the new Red Prince-based armor set, which is what we've all been asking for since we saw the guy in the first place. This DLC is packed full of new loot, and all of it is wildly cool. There's a lot of potential here to go nuts and make co-op builds, solo builds, or whatever else you might think of. But for real, get the DLC for the new shotgun alone. It is great. Or you have my personal favorite, the new fishhook, which is just an amazing item to beat down your enemies with. Is the DLC too difficult? No. Like I already mentioned, the bosses are very easy compared to other ones already in the game. If you find the game too hard, lower the difficulty. If you find it too easy, up the difficulty. Anyone telling you Apocalypse mode is easy is just blatantly lying to you. I've beaten Apocalypse in the base game probably 40 plus times. Some runs take 3 hours with no deaths, others take 8 hours with many deaths. Your build could be different, or bosses could get some fixes or buffs that make them much more challenging. Remnant 2 is a genuinely hard game at its core, and if you choose the harder modes, you should expect to die several times and fight really tough enemies. The DLC is no different. Those new frog enemies alone make certain areas tough, and the gun guys of Lossum usually like to one-hit you, which can be frustrating. But that's the beauty of it. You do not have to stress yourself out. Play on Veteran for a fun and chill experience. Play on Apocalypse if you're ready for a challenge and have watched some good old change-out videos and know that you've got some builds that can get you through. Yeah, shameless plug, I know, but all jokes aside, this area will be difficult just like the rest of the game depending on what difficulty you play on. Practice makes perfect, and that of course applies to video games as well. Or just root doctor and be immune to damage, but you get the point. If you're curious about the new story here, I'll quickly go over it. The story is a continuation of the Lossum side story. You have the Nightweaver, which was the Eater of Dreams, and she's closely related to the large goddess Nimue. You have the Red Prince and Fei Rin bosses who rule over Lossum. Then you have the Council and the King. The Nightweaver is defeated by us in an alternate story, so she's out of the picture here. The Red Prince is closely related to this plotline, but doesn't have any crazy significance other than being the prince and rivaling the king's power. The main characters to know at the start are the Council. These guys advise the king, and there are 3 of them in total. In a different story, you can find a dagger that leads to you ratting out one of the 3. The Betrayer used an enchanted dagger to kill the king. Unfortunately, it only put him to sleep because the goddess Nimue stepped in to modify the enchantment on it upon learning of the plot. The council member who betrayed the king gets killed immediately in front of you once you rat them out, and then you head out to take down the Fei Lin or Fei Rin bosses who are currently in control. At the start of the DLC, it seems the king has awoken from his slumber and is in a wild rage. He imprisons Nimue the goddess as she is supposed to help him and was mistakenly part of the plot to take him down. He then basically kills everyone. He kills his own 2 council members, all of his royal guard, the Fae, the Dran. He just starts killing everybody. Basically a king gone mad by betrayal, and it's your job to stop him. After his defeat, you can free Nimue or end her life for different rewards. The entire questline is full of details to unpack once you get into it, but that's the basics. The king definitely feels powerful and in full control of his kingdom, leading to a memorable and epic showdown with him. And again, this is all just a side story or lore-filled section of the game. It has nothing to do with the overall plot of the route, but it's a complete adventure in its own world, which is pretty crazy considering how many pieces of the puzzle came together to explain the world. Yes, this new Awakened King DLC is worth the money and well worth your time. It adds in a lot of new items and relics and further expands on the betrayal of the one true king of Lossum. This world has a much better story than the main game, as Remnant 2 has some incredible lore. There is much to learn even if you're on your 4th or 5th playthrough of that one area, and you can run through the game testing all kinds of newly possible builds. This DLC gets a 10 out of 10 for me, as I had an excellent experience with new enemy types, interesting puzzles, and epic bosses. Remnant 2 is the single best co-op Souls-like action game to come out this year, and the devs did a fantastic job feeding us more of what was already working. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, a like down below would be fantastic. Good luck taking on the new DLC, and I'll catch you next time.